Greetings and welcome back to the Island of Patmos. Today we'll be discussing Part 3, The Season. All Bible verses are taken from the New King James Version, unless otherwise indicated. In Part 2, we had discussed the Jewish diaspora, which pertains to the fifth seal. Let's review the fifth seal now. Revelation chapter 6, verses 9 to 11. When he opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain for the word of God, and for the testimony which they held. And they cried with a loud voice, saying, How long, O Lord, holy and true, until you judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell on the earth? Then a white robe was given to each of them, and it was said to them that they should rest a little while longer, until both the number of their fellow servants and their brethren, who would be killed as they were, was completed. In the book of Daniel, the man clothed in linen explains that how long refers to time, times, and half a time. Daniel chapter 12, verses 5 to 7. Then I, Daniel, looked, and there stood two others, one on this river bank and the other on that river bank. And one said to the man clothed in linen, who is above the waters of the river, How long shall the fulfillment of these wonders be? Then I heard the man clothed in linen, who is above the waters of the river, when he held up his right hand and his left hand to heaven, and swore by him who lives forever, that it shall be for a time, times, and half a time. And when the power of the holy people has been completely shattered, all these things shall be finished. In Part 2, we had determined time, times, and half a time to be 2,500 years. Based on Daniel's dreams and visions, we had uncovered two different time frames. One started in 552 BC and ended in 1948, and the second started in 533 BC and ended in 1967. The 2,500 years end with the restoration of Jewish control over Israel in 1948 and the completion of the restoration of their power over Jerusalem in 1967. Daniel, however, did not understand what his dream meant and asked for further clarification. Daniel chapter 12, verses 8 and 9. Although I heard, I did not understand. Then I said, My Lord, what shall be the end of these things? And he said, Go your way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. Daniel was told that the words would be closed up and sealed until the time of the end. It was only after 1948 and 1967 that this prophecy could be understood and the words were unsealed. Therefore, 1948 and 1967 mark the beginning of the time of the end, but the fifth seal isn't over yet. Revelation chapter 6, verses 10 to 11. And they cried with a loud voice, saying, How long, O Lord, holy and true, until you judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell on the earth? Then a white robe was given to each of them, and it was said to them that they should rest a little while longer, until both the number of their fellow servants and their brethren, who would be killed as they were, was completed. Then the souls under the altar were given a white robe, and were told to rest for a little while longer. So after the 2,500 years, then they would rest for a little while. Let's review Revelation chapter 6, verse 11 from the King James Version. And white robes were given unto every one of them, and it was said unto them that they should rest yet for a little season, until their fellow servants also and their brethren that should be killed as they were should be fulfilled. In the King James Version, a little while longer is referred to as a little season, so the time, times, and half a time will end, and then the little season will begin. Both the little season mentioned in Revelation and the time of the end mentioned in the book of Daniel are the same time and begin after the time, times, and half a time, end. So do we know when the time of the end will be over? The Bible tells us no, not exactly. Matthew chapter 24, verse 36. But of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only. Although the return of Jesus is not known, we are given an idea of how long the time of the end would be in the parable of the fig tree. Matthew chapter 24, verses 32 to 34. Now learn this parable from the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender and puts forth leaves, you know that summer is near. So you also, when you see all these things, know that it is near, at the doors. Assuredly, I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all these things take place. The first thing we need to determine is who or what is the fig tree. Hosea chapter 9, verse 10. I found Israel like grapes in the wilderness. I saw your fathers as the first fruits on the fig tree in its first season. Hosea 9 says that Israel is the fig tree, and that their fathers were the first season on that fig tree. According to Matthew 24, when Israel puts forth its leaves, summer is near. Israel put forth its leaves when it became a nation in 1948. Summer is referring to the last season, and this season will last for a generation. So we are living during the end of the fifth seal, the time of the end, the last season and generation. Now how long is a generation? Psalm chapter 90, verse 10. The days of our lives are 70 years, and if by reason of strength they are 80 years, yet their boast is only labor and sorrow, for it is soon cut off and we fly away. A generation is 70 to 80 years. The fig tree put forth its leaves in 1948 when Israel became a nation. This would be the start of the last generation. If we add 70 to 80 years to 1948, we come to the years 2018 to 2028. Notice what's happening during this season. Revelation chapter 6, verse 11, from the King James Version. And white robes were given unto every one of them, and it was said unto them that they should rest yet for a little season, until their fellow servants also and their brethren that should be killed as they were should be fulfilled. The servants and the brethren are being killed. This indicates a final persecution of the children of Israel. But Daniel's vision isn't over yet. Daniel chapter 12, verse 11. And from the time that the daily sacrifice is taken away, and the abomination of desolation is set up, there shall be 1,290 days. First, let's determine when the daily sacrifice was taken away. The sacrifices were performed in the inner court of the temple. If the temple is destroyed, the sacrifices will stop or be taken away. The first temple, also known as Solomon's temple, was destroyed in 598 to 597 BC by Nebuchadnezzar. The second Jewish temple stood at the time of Jesus and was destroyed in 70 AD during the siege of Jerusalem. As for a third temple, there is a common theory which believes that a third temple will be built in the near future and then destroyed. So we have three possibilities as to when the daily sacrifice will be taken away: 598 to 597 BC, 70 AD, or sometime in the future. Now let's determine the length of 1290 days. This could indicate 1290 days, which would be approximately 3 years and 7 months, or according to the data-year theory, 1290 days would indicate 1290 years. Now we have 6 possibilities to consider. Let's start with the future temple. The future temple would need to be built and destroyed, and then the abomination would be set up in 1290 days or 1290 years. Let's start with 1290 days. If we are in the last season, and this last season ends in 2028, then this temple needs to be built and then destroyed by 2024 to 2025 if the abomination were to be set up by 2028. That's a possibility, but let's continue. Now let's consider 1290 years. Could a future temple be built, destroyed, and then the abomination set up 1290 years after that? Let's say that the temple is built and then destroyed in 2024, in which case the abomination would be set up 1290 years later in 3314. That goes far beyond the time of the end, which ends in 2028. This is not a realistic possibility. Let's move on to 70 AD, when the second Jewish temple was destroyed by the Romans. We have two possibilities. 1. The abomination is set up 1290 days after 70 AD, or in 73 to 74 AD. 2. The abomination is set up 1290 years after 70 AD, or in 1360 AD. Let's begin with 1290 days after 70 AD, which brings us to 73 to 74 AD. The siege of Masada occurred at this time. This was the final event of the Great Jewish War of 70 AD. Masada is an ancient fortress in the southern district of Israel, situated on top of an isolated rock plateau. It's located on the eastern edge of the Judean desert, overlooking the Dead Sea. This fortress could only be reached by a single narrow pathway. This pathway was named the Snake for the way it twists and zigzags to the summit. In 66 AD, at the beginning of the Great Jewish War, a group of Jewish extremists called the Sicarii left Jerusalem and settled in Masada. Following the siege of Jerusalem in 70 AD, additional members of the Sicarii, along with many other Jewish families, fled Jerusalem and settled in Masada as well. In 72 AD, the Roman army surrounded Masada and began construction of a siege ramp. In the spring of 73, the ramp was completed, and the Romans were finally able to breach the wall around Masada. When the Romans entered the fortress, however, they found it to be a citadel of death. According to the historian Josephus, the long siege by the troops of the Roman Empire led to the mass suicide of the Sicarii rebels and the other Jewish families in Masada. As Judaism prohibits suicide, Josephus reported that the Jews had drawn lots and killed each other in turn down to the last man, who was the only one to actually take his own life. They had destroyed everything in Masada except for the food storehouses, to show that they had retained the ability to live, and so had chosen death over slavery. There were, however, 2 women and 5 children in Masada who survived by hiding inside a cistern. Although this is definitely an interesting historical event, no abomination was set up at this time. Now let's consider 1290 years after 70 AD. This brings us to 1360 AD. My history search didn't reveal anything significant happening in Israel at this time. However, there was a natural phenomenon in France known as Black Monday that is worth mentioning. 1360 marked the end of the first phase of the 100 Years' War. The 100 Years' War started in 1337 and was a series of armed conflicts between the kingdoms of England and France over who should control France. It was one of the most significant conflicts of the Middle Ages. The Edwardian War was the first phase of the 100 Years' War and lasted from 1337 to 1360. In October 1359, Edward III of England crossed the English Channel to France with a huge invading force. By April of 1360, he had sacked and burned the suburbs of Paris and was now besieging the town of Chartres. As night fell, a sudden storm blew up. Edward's troops were camped outside the town, and their tents were no match for the storm that would follow. A huge drop in temperature was followed by lightning, freezing rain, high winds, and huge hailstorms, which pelted both man and horse. There was no escape from the killer storm. Tents were torn apart by the howling wind. Soldiers fled in panic. 2 of the English commanders were killed, and the king was forced to his knees, pleading with God for mercy. It took just half an hour for the storm to kill over 1,000 Englishmen and some 6,000 horses. Edward was convinced that the storm was a sign from God. He rushed to pursue peace with France, and as a direct result of the killer storm, on May 8, 1360, the Treaty of Pertigny was signed. Black Monday refers to Easter Monday of April 13, 1360, so called after the freak hailstorm. An interesting story, but no abomination was set up. This brings us to the destruction of Solomon's temple in 598 to 597 BC by Nebuchadnezzar. We have 2 possibilities. 1. The abomination is set up 1,290 days after 598 to 597, or in 595 to 594 BC. 2. The abomination is set up 1,290 years after 598 to 597, or in 692 to 693 AD. Let's begin with 1,290 days after 598 to 597, which brings us to 595 to 594 BC. In 603 BC, Nebuchadnezzar began construction of a golden image statue. Daniel chapter 3, verse 1. Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold, whose height was 60 cubits, and its width 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura, in the province of Babylon. A cubit is 1.5 feet, so the image was 9 feet wide and 90 feet tall. In 595 BC, the image was complete, and Nebuchadnezzar sent a message to all the heads of state, including Zedekiah the king of Judah, to attend the formal dedication service to this golden image. Daniel chapter 3, verse 2. And King Nebuchadnezzar sent word to gather together the satraps, the administrators, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces, to come to the dedication of the image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. In the spring of 594 BC, Nebuchadnezzar performs the dedication ceremony for his golden image and declares that everyone must bow down to the image when the musical instruments start playing. Daniel chapter 3, verses 3 to 7. So the satraps, the administrators, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces gathered together for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then a herald cried aloud, "To you it is commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that at the time you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery, in symphony with all kinds of music, you shall fall down and worship the gold image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning fiery furnace." So at that time, when all the people heard the sound of the horn, flute, harp, and lyre, in symphony with all kinds of music, all the people, nations, and languages fell down and worshipped the gold image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Although this golden image does qualify as an abomination, and it does occur 1,290 days after the destruction of Solomon's temple, Daniel was informed that this prophecy would take place after his lifetime, for he would be at rest. Daniel chapter 12, verse 13. But you go your way till the end, for you shall rest, and will arise to your inheritance at the end of the days. So the golden image of Nebuchadnezzar could not be the abomination of desolation spoken of by the man in linen, but it is a foreshadow to an event which is still to come. Now let's consider 1290 years, starting in 598 to 597 BC. This brings us to 692 to 693 AD. In 692, the Dome of the Rock was completed. Here is a picture of the Dome of the Rock. This is what stands on the Temple Mount today. The Dome of the Rock is an Islamic shrine located on the Temple Mount in the city of Jerusalem. Its initial construction was undertaken by the Umayyad Caliphate and completed in 692 AD. It has since been situated on the site of Solomon's Temple and subsequently the Second Jewish Temple. The Dome of the Rock is the world's oldest surviving work of Islamic architecture. Yet few people, including most Christians, understand the many blasphemous writings inside and outside of the Dome of the Rock. The inscriptions blaspheme Jesus, the Son of God, by repeatedly saying that Christ was not divine but only a prophet. The Shahada, the Islamic confession of faith, which states that there is only one God and Muhammad is his prophet, is also included in this inscription. This would qualify as an abomination. It was built 1290 years after the destruction of Solomon's temple, and it was built after Daniel's lifetime. This matches the prophecy of the 1290 days given in Daniel. But there's more to this prophecy. Daniel chapter 12, verses 11 and 12. And from the time that the daily sacrifice is taken away, and the abomination of desolation is set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Blessed is he who waits, and comes to the 1,335 days. Since the abomination of desolation is referring to the Dome of the Rock, and the Dome of the Rock was built 1290 years after the destruction of the Second Jewish Temple, the 1,335 days must also follow the day-to-year theory, making this prophecy equal to 1,335 years. So 1,335 years after the Dome of the Rock was completed in 692 AD brings us to 2027, which is during the time of the little season. This prophecy comes with the blessing. Daniel chapter 12, verse 12. Blessed is he who waits, and comes to the 1,335 days. But what are they waiting for? Luke chapter 12, verses 35 to 37. Let your waist be girded and your lamps burning, and you yourselves be like men who wait for their master when he will return from the wedding, that when he comes and knocks, they may open to him immediately. Blessed are those servants whom the master, when he comes, will find watching. They are waiting for Jesus, their master, to return. These are the ones who are caught up to be with the Lord. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 17. Then we who are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and thus we shall always be with the Lord. So if the end of the 1,335 days is 2027, this is near the end of the little season. Let's look at the season again. Psalm chapter 90, verse 10. The days of our lives are 70 years, and if by reason of strength they are 80 years, yet their boast is only labor and sorrow, for it is soon cut off and we fly away. Between the 70th and the 80th year of the season comes strength, but also labor and sorrow. We had determined that the 70th year is 2018 and the 80th year is 2028. We are in the time of labor and sorrow, need the strength to endure it, and will be blessed as we endure this time and wait for the Lord. There is another blessing in Revelation, chapter 14, verse 13. Then I heard a voice from heaven saying to me, "Write, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Yes, says the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, and their works follow them." These individuals also had the strength to endure the season of labor and sorrow. They are blessed because during this season they died in the Lord and are now at rest from their labors, just as Daniel, who was told that he would be at rest. Now, why do they die? Revelation chapter 13, verses 14 to 17. And he deceives those who dwell on the earth, by whose signs which he was granted to do in the sight of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast, who was wounded by the sword and lived. He was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. He causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads, and that no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. They died because they did not worship the image of the beast. So, how do they die? Revelation chapter 20, verse 4. And I saw thrones, and they sat on them, and judgment was committed to them. Then I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for their witness to Jesus and for the word of God, who had not worshipped the beast or his image, and had not received his mark on their foreheads or on their hands. So those who do not worship the beast or his image, and do not receive his mark on their foreheads or on their hands, are beheaded. The golden image that Nebuchadnezzar made was a foreshadow of the image of the beast that will soon come upon us. We must not take the mark of the beast or worship its image. There were 3 Jews who did not worship Nebuchadnezzar's golden image. Let's find out what happened to them. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were friends of Daniel and fellow Hebrew captives taken to Babylon under King Nebuchadnezzar. At Daniel's request, the king appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego as Daniel's advisors. However, they refused to worship the golden image, and this angered Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel chapter 3, verses 14 and 15. Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you will not serve my gods or worship the gold image which I have set up? Now if you are ready at the time you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery, in symphony with all kinds of music, and you fall down and worship the image which I have made, good. But if you do not worship, you shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who can deliver you from my hands?" Here is their response to the king. Daniel chapter 3, verses 16 to 18. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If that is the case, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up." We must be like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We must be able to say that our God whom we serve is able to deliver us. But if not, we will not serve other gods nor will we worship the image of the beast. Here is the blessing for God's deliverance for those who wait for him. But if not, and the image of the beast is before us, we must not worship the image of the beast. Our death in the Lord becomes our blessing, as we would then be at rest from our labors. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did not worship the gold image and were tossed into the fiery furnace. However, they were not harmed. Daniel chapter 3, verses 24 and 25. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished, and he rose in haste and spoke, saying to his counselors, "Did we not cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire?" They answered and said to the king, "True, O king." "Look," he answered, "I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt, and in the form of the 4th is like the Son of God." Let's see how the story ends. Daniel chapter 3, verses 26 to 30. Then Nebuchadnezzar went near the mouth of the burning fiery furnace and spoke, saying, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here." Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came from the midst of the fire, and the satraps, administrators, governors, and the king's counselors gathered together, and they saw these men on whose bodies the fire had no power. The hair on their head was not singed, nor were their garments affected, and the smell of fire was not on them. Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him. And they have frustrated the king's word and yielded their bodies, that they should not serve nor worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I make a decree that any people, nation, or language which speaks anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made an ash heap, because there is no other God who can deliver like this." Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. Just as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were promoted by King Nebuchadnezzar after they were delivered from God, those who in the future are beheaded because they refuse to worship the image of the beast will live and reign with Jesus for 1,000 years. Revelation chapter 20, verse 4. "And I saw thrones, and they sat on them, and judgment was committed to them. Then I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for their witness to Jesus and for the word of God, who had not worshipped the beast or his image, and had not received his mark on their foreheads or on their hands, and they lived and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. To summarize, the destruction of the temple occurred in 598 BC, when King Nebuchadnezzar destroyed Solomon's temple on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. 1,290 years later, in 692 AD, the Dome of the Rock was set up, which is the abomination of desolation. 1,335 days after that, in 2027 AD, there comes a blessing for those who are waiting for the Lord to return. We are living at the end of the 5th seal, in the time of the end, the last season, the final generation, and the time of labor and sorrow. We should be watching and waiting for Jesus like never before, for our God is able to deliver us. Thank you for attending. Stay tuned for part 4, the beginning of sorrows of this series, Back to the Island of Patmos. God bless.